It is Wednesday, January 31st, and this is The National.
Tonight, a Me Too moment for women in the RCMP. CBC News reveals the staggering number of them joining a class action lawsuit.
New developments in an alleged plot to fix the price of your bread. Why big Canadian grocers and bakeries are accused of acting like a cartel.
And after the State of the Union, we drill down into the state of Texas. Why it's no longer just a political pipe dream for Democrats. But we begin with the Me Too movement that continues to send shockwaves right around the world, from Hollywood movie sets to the boardrooms of corporate power. Tonight, it is rocking two of this country's most esteemed institutions. On Parliament Hill, an investigation and a retirement amid allegations of harassment and assault. We will have more on that in a moment. And CBC News has learned hundreds of women in the RCMP are saying Me Too, joining a class action settlement alleging harassment and discrimination, including this woman.
I had a supervisor grab me and kiss me, and he wanted to engage in a lot more than that, and I refused.
The initial prediction was that around 1,500 women might file claims, but now the legal team says that number could hit 4,000. And to put that in perspective, since the force first opened its doors to female officers in 1974, about 20,000 women have worked for the RCMP. So 4,000 claimants would represent 1 in 5 women who've worked there. Dave Seglins is part of the CBC News investigative team that broke this story.
1974, the year the RCMP first allowed women to become frontline police officers. A bold march into a male-dominated profession. Many women who signed up, and in the decades since, were met by some men who were hostile, sexist, even abusive.
I would say within the first year, my perception of the RCMP changed.
This former IT specialist says she was forced to take medical leave from the Mounties after years of her boss hitting on her. She still fears him, so we've agreed to conceal her identity.
I loved the work I was doing, but the relationship with the supervisor was very difficult, and because I refused the advances, there was then bullying and intimidation and mocking me in front of people afterwards. And that went on for many years.
She's now one of many women on the RCMP coming forward alleging harassment, emboldened by the Me Too movement. Lawyers expect as many as 4,000 to file claims for compensation, all part of an RCMP class action settlement that included this apology.
I stand humbly before you today and solemnly offer our sincere apology. We hurt you. For that, I'm truly sorry.
This former RCMP inspector helped spearhead the class action.
I've received, since yesterday, I'd say approximately 30 calls.
She's now helping others file their claims, many women still on the force, who say little has changed.
New blood is always welcome.
This class action is uncovering all sorts of ugly history.
What do you think of this?
CBC has obtained a letter found in the mailboxes of some women at the RCMP who spoke up, a so-called hurt feelings report. Mockingly, it asks if the recipient is a crybaby or worse.
Boy, do we have a long way to go. Disgusting. Whether it was 5 years ago, it's 5 years in the future, or it's now, there's no place for this in the workforce.
The RCMP won't comment on the hurt feelings report, but says it has begun a number of initiatives to improve the workplace. But the force won't say whether that includes specific training to combat sexual harassment. Dave Seglin, CBC News, Toronto.
Now, the initial settlement amount was $100 million, but as more women file claims, the government has said that amount will go up. For women who wish to be a part of the settlement, the application process, though, it is long and it's detailed. It includes a 33-page claim form asking women to detail dates, times, witnesses, whether it was reported, who it was reported to, and the psychological or physical repercussions. Now, we have Megan McPhee joining us, who's a lawyer based right here in Toronto, representing one of the plaintiffs who has launched this class action suit. And Megan, just on a human level, I mean, the thing that I'm curious to know is how hard of a process is this to go through? Because my understanding is the questionnaire itself actually has a trigger warning at the top.
It does, and the class members that we're talking to are telling us how very difficult it has been to put together these claims. They're dealing with issues that they have compartmentalized for many years in order to be able to do their jobs, and now they're having to go back and revisit those traumas and to tell those stories. At the same time, they're telling us it's really liberating because they're finally able to have their voices heard.
Well, and are some of these women who have already filed claims, do they still work for the RCMP? So
there's a significant portion of them that do still work for the RCMP, and that's why the confidentiality mechanisms that are in place for this are so important. The settlement is administered by a former Supreme Court judge. The RCMP never finds out who has come forward to make a claim.
Right. But still, I mean, that must add an entirely new dimension to have to go through both of those things, to go through that process and then still to have to do your daily jobs. So you mentioned some of the process that folks have to go through to determine who's eligible, what they're entitled to exactly. What does that structure look like?
So they're filling out a very detailed claim process, and then they're potentially meeting with the assessor to discuss their claims. And then those claims are going to be, there's going to be a broad report at the end from the assessor that's going to discuss the sort of trends that we've seen. And that's supposed to be a vehicle for the change initiatives, which is one of the overarching goals of this settlement, is to change the RCMP going forward and to make it a safer place for women to work.
Okay. Megan McPhee, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And it's not just the RCMP tonight. The Me Too movement is still hitting Ottawa.
Dealing with harassment has become a political issue with pitfalls for many parties, and it's not just elected members of parliament. As Evan Dyer tells us, an appointed senator who's been the subject of workplace harassment allegations and investigations in the past is retiring early.
A fixture of Canadian politics for decades, Colin Kenny was due to retire when he turned 75 next December. In calling it quits early, Kenny made no public reference to the sexual harassment scandals now roiling the world of Canadian politics. But over the course of his career, the senator has faced a number of complaints from women who've worked for him or near him.
It was really hard.
One of them is former staffer Pascal Brisson.
He requested that I wear high heels at work. He called me on a business trip once to tell me he was thinking about me in my bathing suit by a pool. And he also asked me which alcoholic drink I like to have and if I would come back to his place one day to have a drink.
Colin Kenny quit the Liberal caucus in 2013 when Brisson filed a complaint against him, but a Senate investigation cleared Kenny of any wrongdoing. Yesterday, Brisson wrote to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
I thought it'd be a great time to write to the Prime Minister and request him to reopen the investigation or start a new one.
What kind of response did you receive to that?
I didn't receive a response yet.
Brisson says she wasn't happy with how her complaint was handled the first time. She says she wanted to bring other women as witnesses to testify to a pattern of behavior, but wasn't allowed.
And I thought the timing was really appropriate with the whole Me Too movement coming to the Hill and the response of the leadership. There's been a few different people that gave their resignation following sexual harassment complaints. So I thought the timing was right and that I could have a bigger impact today, 5 years later.
Brisson says she believes her letter to Trudeau may have had a role in Kenny's decision to quit 10 months early.
And so, Evan, what is the Prime Minister's office saying about this case?
Well, Ian, we've recently heard from PMO confirmation that they did receive Pascal Brisson's letter, but they're also saying they had not yet contacted Senator Kenny's office about it. So the timing is suggestive, certainly looks suggestive, but it may be coincidental.
And this isn't just an issue that's affecting the Liberal Party. The Conservatives ordering an investigation about how it handled sexual misconduct allegations against Rick Dijkstra, one of its former MPs.
That's right. Conservative Party leader Andrew Scheer today announced that his party will bring in an outside investigator to look into why former MP Rick Dijkstra was allowed to run for the party in the 2015 election campaign when senior people in the party allegedly knew he'd been accused of sexually assaulting a Conservative Party staffer. Rick Dijkstra lost his seat in that election and went on to become president of the Ontario Conservative Party, but he resigned that post on Sunday, 2 hours after Maclean's contacted him to say it was going public with those sexual assault allegations. Andrew Scheer today said the Federal Conservative Party will make public the findings of this investigation into who knew what and when in the Conservative war room during the 2015 election. Let's watch.
I think it's important to wait for the results to determine the nature of what happened. If what was alleged to have happened took place, obviously that's very serious and would have presented it would be very problematic. But we'll wait to see what exactly comes out and what details are provided.
Now, Ian Scheer added that he himself was Speaker at the time and had no knowledge of these events in 2015. Today, he spoke to the Conservative caucus, and we're told he laid down the law in no uncertain terms. Zero tolerance in the party for sexual misconduct or harassment of any kind.
All right, Evan Dyer in Ottawa. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, to Toronto now, where the investigation into the actions of an accused serial killer has put many across the city on edge.
I was aware that several men had gone missing, but I did not think it had anything to do with our street at all. So finding out that that happened was like a huge wake-up call that anywhere and anyone could do that. So it was kind of scary, yeah.
12-year-old Theo Weinstein. Bruce McArthur used a property on her street, and now it's busy with cadaver dogs and forensics teams. As Joanna Remiliotis explains, it's looking like the 5 murders McArthur is accused of are just the beginning.
The update was expectedly grim, as investigators continue to scour the grounds of a Toronto home where a suspected serial killer stored his tools. The exhausted detective in charge stopped by. This is a 24-hour operation and a horrific one.
We believe there are more victims on top of those 5, and as we identify those victims, I can't give you any idea about a number, but I do expect more charges to be laid.
The ominous prediction comes after police seized more than a dozen planters from homes that hired Bruce McArthur as a landscaper.
We're not just grabbing every planter we see. If there's an indication from the K9 units that there's some decomposition around that planter, we'll grab it.
The implication is chilling, considering police have found the remains of at least 3 people in just 2 planters they've examined. At the same home those were taken from, the plan now to warm up the frozen ground with heaters and start digging. He's retired now, but for 14 years, Kevin Bryan was a forensic investigator. He says the scope of the McArthur investigation is staggering and will be tedious. Only certain parts of the remains will reveal key information.
Typically, the skull, ribs can give you, if there's broken ribs or if there's ribs with cut marks in them, that can indicate a cause of death.
Grisly details. Peter's Gromo follows them all with the horror of someone who might have ended up a victim too. Scromo knew McArthur for years when they met up in Toronto last spring. He says they had drinks at this bar. Then McArthur offered him a lift to his hotel. A friendly encounter turned intimate, then suddenly violent.
He really grabbed my neck, violently twisted it right to his crotch, and his pants were undone. And that's when I really was quite disturbed.
Scromo managed to get away and never saw McArthur again.
I have an 18.5-inch neck. My neck is big. And for him to grab my neck with one hand, twist it like that, I literally thought one more second he would have snapped and broken my neck, and I was a dead man.
Scromo says he had no idea, but some of McArthur's dating profiles suggest he was into violent sex. Today, a man posted how McArthur pursued him on a gay chat app last fall. In online messages, he says when McArthur told him he was into asphyxiation too, he got scared and blocked him. Experts say violent sexual fantasies are common among serial killers.
They rehearse in their head for many years, and then eventually they begin to sort of experiment and flirt with the idea of actually acting them out.
If they know, police aren't saying how the 5 men McArthur is accused of killing died. Only that it's a matter of when, not if, they'll find more. Joanna Remiliotis, CBC News, Toronto.
There are more than 30 properties being scrutinized by police. This investigation is big, and it's getting bigger. Dozens of tips continue to come in, and the search for remains and other evidence has already expanded well beyond Toronto to properties in Peel, York, and Durham regions. And Andrew, newly released documents suggest Canada's bread price-fixing scheme may be bigger than we thought.
Yeah, according to Canada's competition watchdog, the places where so many people do their grocery shopping, the country's biggest retailers, they broke the law. And today, court documents, more than 1,000 pages long, revealed that very list of who knew what about this scheme that dates back more than a decade. The Competition Bureau even calls it an alleged cartel. Loblaw, Sobeys, Metro, Walmart, Giant Tiger, but also all of the brands they own, which ultimately captures just about everywhere most Canadians do their shopping. Also included, Canada Bread and Weston Bakeries, who all, quote, participated in a conspiracy to fix the price of bread. So here's what the Bureau says it's been costing you. Since 2001, the companies allegedly agreed to raise prices at least 15 times, and each time, about 10 cents was added to each loaf. So after 16 years of artificial price increases, we're all paying at least an extra $1.50 for each loaf of bread. And for all the people who eat all that bread, it adds up. Here's Jacqueline Hansen on how the alleged plot took shape.
The Competition Bureau alleges that senior officers at the bread suppliers worked together to raise wholesale prices, then met with the retailers. The Bureau believes each retailer agreed to the hikes as long as their competitors were on board. The Competition Bureau submitted the claims to the court in the fall in order to obtain search warrants.
Proving a conspiracy or a cartel is actually very difficult because it relies on what was said secretly among people. However, where one of the two parties to that conversation claims that certain matters were discussed, that's the beginning of evidence.
Loblaw and Weston Bakeries admitted to the Competition Bureau that they were involved in the alleged price-fixing scheme. But the other companies targeted in the investigation deny violating the Competition Act. Sobeys issued a particularly strong statement today, calling the allegations irresponsible and reckless, vowing to fight false allegations in court. Canada Bread claims that the accusations date back to a time when the company was under previous ownership. If any of the companies are charged and found guilty, they could face major fines and even jail time.
You have to make them pay, I think, monetarily if you can. And if you put people behind bars, that's going to make a lot more people say, you know what, I don't want to be involved in this in the future.
Even though none of the allegations have been proven, it's enough for some consumers and industry watchers to question what else might be going on.
Now, I'm asking myself, where else in the grocery store is there collusion other than bread?
The Competition Bureau confirms that its investigation of the alleged bread price fixing is ongoing. In the meantime, for the grocery industry in Canada that typically prides itself on competitive pricing, consumers' trust in that could be at risk. Jacqueline Hansen, CBC News, Toronto.
Well, some other stories we're watching tonight on The National. The totals are staggering. We learned today how many people died from opioids in BC last year, but one number may contain some hope.
Also, we heard the State of the Union. Tonight, the state of the Democrats. Paul Hunter will take us where you might not think to meet many of them, Texas.
And plugging the leaks. Our David Cochrane reveals an unlikely source of secrets on Parliament Hill.
But down this hallway and down that hallway are washrooms. And when the caucus meets every week on Wednesday, they post security guards outside the toilet entrance.
The defense minister needs to, in very short order, get a handle on this to make sure that there's no other leaks.
This culture of leaking must stop.
Party politics is full of secrets that often get leaked for a specific purpose, to get reaction to a new idea or perhaps to embarrass an opponent. But on Parliament Hill, some leaks are accidental. As David Cochrane tells us, they seep into a room usually known for privacy.
With all of the history here, it would be great if these walls could talk. It turns out they kind of can.
The doors leaked, the sound leaked through into the hallways. All of the old masonry walls, all built with brick, some of them 3 feet thick. You would think they would have phenomenal soundproofing, but they didn't.
Parliament Hill is a complex of ornate heritage buildings built in the 19th century. Over the years, holes have been punched through the stone walls to handle modern ventilation and wiring. It's turned the place into a sieve.
There was just very poor soundproofing, and you certainly couldn't have confidential conversations either into the hallway or the meeting rooms.
The renovations that are happening now will solve a lot of those problems. But in the meantime, MPs have had to find some creative solutions to keep their conversations secret.
You'd expect to see security outside of the caucus rooms, but there's something else going on just down here. Now, the rules of the Parliament means we can't take our cameras down to show you exactly what's happening, but down this hallway and down that hallway are washrooms. And when the caucus meets every week on Wednesday, they post security guards outside the toilet entrance. The problem is that the secret conversations in the caucus rooms seep through the walls into the toilet stalls, so you can get a leak while you're taking one.
There was no expectation of privacy, but what happens in many cases is people don't know. People go into an office, MP, or they close the door, they're in a meeting room, they close the door, they assume nobody can hear them, but you could hear them in the janitor's closet, in the next door office, in the hallway, and so nobody has any idea that they're overheard.
Fortier has done a lot of this work for the federal government over the years. His other big client right now is even more famous than the Prime Minister. He's building a state-of-the-art studio for Drake.
What's more fun, soundproofing the Prime Minister's office or building a new studio for Drake?
Absolutely building a new studio, because it's totally free form.
A place famous for its political leaks, trying to plug some unintended ones. David Cochran, CBC News, Ottawa.
And now you know. Well, still ahead, after Donald Trump's State of the Union address, Democrats are as determined as ever to fight his agenda, but do they really have a chance in the Republican fortress of Texas?
We have to get off of our asses because it's not going to happen on its own. That's what we saw with Hillary, right? It didn't happen on its own. We all thought it was going to. But things are changing here. It's like a big sleeping giant that's waking up.
It was a very transformative speech for some of us last night, because while our expectations for greatness and vision with the president are not high, he stooped to a new low in terms of how he dealt with issues.
That's the response from top Democrats in the U.S. to Donald Trump's State of the Union address last night. And Democrats aren't the only ones who found Trump's words and actions transformative.
When I say a transformation, how can we have a president of the United States that tells the world that there's good people marching with the Ku Klux Klan? How can we tell people that good people are marching with people who preach evil, who preach bigotry, who preach racism? And me being Jewish, it was beyond belief.
That sentiment isn't unusual in the United States, especially when memories of the deadly violence in Charlottesville, Virginia last summer were fresh. But Larry Strauss, who you just heard there, was a Republican from Texas. He isn't Republican anymore, and he isn't alone either. So in the wake of Donald Trump's State of the Union address, and as midterm congressional campaigns gear up, Paul Hunter went to reliably red Texas to check out the state of the Democrats.
Is that enough aisle space? Yeah, let me see. Yeah, plenty.
For Larry Strauss, this is a pretty big night.
Hey, thanks for bringing the coffee. No problem. Thank you.
Finding his way as a fledgling political volunteer. Tonight, organizing a candidates panel for this year's big midterm election.
Yeah, sure. If you can find somebody to help me with registration, there's one more table.
Larry's no expert at this, but he's giving it a go. And all of it as a brand new Democrat in Texas.
We're having our forum tonight.
All of his life, Larry'd been a Republican, but last year he quit the party and joined the other side.
You know, we're all behind you. Thank you.
Why? Donald Trump. Remember that march by white supremacists in Charlottesville, Virginia last summer, ending with violence and death? And remember Trump's comments afterward?
Very fine people on both sides.
I was not only disgusted with President Trump of the Republican Party.
For Larry, defending intolerance was beyond the pale.
None of the Republican Party stood up and said, that's not right. We disagree with that comment. We disavow that comment. What that did for the racists and the white supremacists and the Ku Klux Klan, it gave them credit. And I was disgusted. And that's when I started my transformation.
The problem here is that we're giving all the benefit to the top 1%.
Switching parties and coming out as a Democrat in Texas is huge. It's long been one of the most staunch Republican states in the country. But to Larry's happy surprise, nowadays he's not alone.
In fact, I feel more accepted than ostracized. I didn't realize how many Democrats there are who were my friends that I didn't know were Democrats until I switched. And again, I can't believe it. I mean, the Republican Party didn't stand up, but Larry Strauss stood up.
Turns out Texas is changing. Increasingly, there's a fresh face in this state, younger than you might expect, and not so cowboy. The suburbs of Dallas are growing at light speed, with all kinds of people moving here from other parts of the country and around the world seeking good jobs and bringing with them a new outlook on Texas politics. Want a glimpse? Check this South Asian grocery store just north of the city.
So is it fair to say that, in a sense, the future of Texas politics is in places like this? You know what I mean?
Of course. I think we've had a tremendous growth within the South Asian community here.
A long-time Texan by way of Toronto, Shonda Parbu's South Asian background is no longer an anomaly in this state. And as the number of South Asians in Texas grows, so too does their political clout. The message here:
your vote counts, and that you need to come to the polls, and we can make a difference. I think every time we do one of these events, the reaction we get is, oh my gosh, we didn't know there were Democrats in our neighborhoods.
Like with Larry, Shonda found the Trump presidency offensive, and it changed her world. Now she too is a political organizer, aiming to fire up fellow Democrats, fellow South Asians, to get the vote out, to affect change next time, even here.
I think we all lived as closet Democrats for so long. We just didn't get involved in conversations. And, you know, the neighbors are always putting on their whatever signs, Bush signs, whatever, and you just kind of, you know, you don't put up your sign because you don't want to cause any trouble.
Antipathy for Trump, she says, is turning that on its ear for the state's long-forgotten Democrats.
They're frustrated. They don't know what to do about it, but they know they have to do something. But women are mad. Women, and I think a lot of minorities, are starting to understand that this just cannot maintain itself.
And so it is that smack between a beauty salon and a martial arts studio at the local Democratic headquarters, amid the anti-Trump stickers inside, there's Democratic hope in the headlines. But can they build on that?
I pulled the language about, because it was kind of generic.
The day after Trump's election, Stacey Donald showed up here in tears.
I voted for Hillary, but I didn't do anything else.
It was the day she, too, turned political. Last year, Stacey ran for College Board of Trustees, and she won. The lesson, she says, for all Texas Democrats:
people are like, we have to get off of our asses because it's not going to happen on its own. That's what we saw with Hillary, right? It didn't happen on its own. We all thought it was going to. But things are changing here. It's like a big sleeping giant that's waking up.
I'll check. Check.
Or is it all just a Democratic dream? Among the many friends of freshly minted Democrat Larry Strauss are those who remind him Republicans are still the majority in Texas. And yes, some bring guns to a poker game. Between hands, talking Trump, taxes, immigration, race, you name it.
And I'm talking about his latest remark was shithole or
How
whatever.
do you know he said that? Were you in the room?
I was not in the room, but I feel pretty confident he said that.
Okay, but none of us know for sure.
That's right.
None of us know for sure, and everybody's jumping on this as though we're a virtual certainty. Would you assume that in court?
It's clear. Trump backers here 100% still back Trump.
I think the economy's doing well, the stock market's doing well. Taxes have been reduced. I don't see why for the most part, there shouldn't be a positive glow on the first year.
People want a change.
But
They want us
remember
to get
Larry's
out there and
panel
do
for Democratic
something different
hopefuls?
in
Make
Texas.
no
Thank you very
mistake,
much.
they're all in this to win.
Hi.
Lupe Valdez.
I know you.
Good.
Among the candidates, an openly gay Hispanic woman and former sheriff,
There's 10 in my race, you know that, right?
now running for, Texas governor. What does Lupe Valdez think of the Trump effect in Texas?
Well, I'm not sure, but what I hope is that he's the best thing that ever happened to Democrats.
When we first started doing the grassroots efforts.
And across town, Shonda's still at it with a fundraiser for one of the Democrats' great hopes in this state, running for U.S. Senate, taking on Ted Cruz, no less, and keen to win the hearts of Texans everywhere, Beto O'Rourke.
And that most important asset that we have, the ability to inspire people the world over who want to follow our example.
Embracing liberal sensibilities in conservative Texas and in turn being embraced for doing so.
They're putting up a sign and
In a state, perhaps, at a turning point.
what's happening here? There's something amazing and absolutely unprecedented in Texas, at least in my 45 years, where you have people who I think because they recognize that everything that they care about in their lives and their communities for this state, for the future of this country is on the line. And so they're getting off the sidelines.
But are there enough of them? Will it work? Can Beto and the rest of them reinvent this state? With midterms now coming up fast, Democrats in Texas, energized by Donald Trump, are set to find out. Paul Hunter, CBC News, Dallas.
Now, talk of a Democratic comeback in the state isn't new, but for big statewide offices, it has been a nearly 25-year drought in Texas. It hasn't had a Democratic governor since 1995. Its last Democratic senator left office in 1993. And the last time Texans voted in a Democrat for president was Jimmy Carter in 1976.
Next, treating the person, not just the disease. Breast cancer survivors give doctors a lesson in empathy.
I hope they realize they're dealing with real people. I hope they realize that, how they speak to a patient makes the world of difference. You can make or break a patient's idea about what's going on with their treatment with one sentence.
The 2017 data reflects the most tragic year ever with respect to illicit drug deaths in British Columbia.
The numbers are in and they are grim. The BC Coroner Service giving an update on the overdose crisis today. It says more than 1,400 people died after taking illicit drugs last year. That's almost 4 a day. And the opioid fentanyl was detected in about 81% of those cases, often mixed with other drugs. One hopeful sign, the number of deaths for November and December were down significantly from the last 2 months of 2016, though health officials won't call it a trend yet.
Last year in Vancouver, we had not seen the same rise in overdose deaths as had been seen in some other parts of the province, and we assumed that it was because of the services already in place. And then we had a dramatic increase last November and December because of the arrival of carfentanil. So there are other, even more toxic substances that could enter the drug supply that can always change what we see.
The last year she's referring to there is, of course, 2016. Now health officials say they hope their efforts are making a difference. They have expanded the naloxone program. That's the drug that can revive someone who's overdosed. They've also increased OD prevention services and improved access to opioid replacement therapy. When asked whether legalization should be next, officials said they support it, but it won't happen anytime soon.
We can't wait for that. Look how long it's taking to put in place the regulatory framework for cannabis. It would take several years to get a framework in for all other psychoactive substances. So yes, we need to advocate for that, but that's not going to help us in the short term.
They say they'll continue to advocate for policy changes, but the focus now has to be on more immediate solutions like identifying risk factors and early intervention. There was a disturbing scene in a Quebec courthouse today, and tonight questions about why an 18-year-old was shot in the head by a security officer. It happened in Maniwaki, about a 2-hour drive north of Ottawa. The scuffle that led to the shooting was caught on video, and a warning, there is strong language and disturbing content.
Hey.
A witness who spoke to CBC said the 18-year-old wanted to smoke, and when guards refused, he became violent. You can see a number of security officers came in to help and moved into another room. A woman shouts, "Don't hurt my son." And though you don't see him, you can hear the gun being fired and the reaction. The agency that's investigating says the 18-year-old tried to grab the security officer's baton and hit him. That's when, according to investigators, the officer shot the young man at close range. And a provincial police officer said both were taken to hospital with serious injuries. We're continuing to follow the developments on this story.
Medicine's changing, and it's no longer just you open somebody up and it's surgery. It's changing an understanding of the patient. And I want new doctors to understand that I am a patient who might have a disease, but I am a person.
Jennifer Schultz is a mother, a cancer survivor, and now a patient teacher. She's one of several patients who joined a unique hospital program aimed at teaching medical students valuable lessons in empathy. Cass Rusi takes us inside one of those classes.
Jennifer Schultz is a pinball junkie, especially on Sundays. That's when she hauls her sidekick, 12-year-old daughter Jameson, to this West End Toronto pub. There in the back stands the adversary, a vintage pinball machine called Whirlwind. The irony isn't lost on Schultz. 3 years ago, the 45-year-old was caught up in her own whirlwind when she was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer.
I had no idea. It never had crossed my mind, breast cancer.
What followed was 8 rounds of chemotherapy, 25 cycles of radiation, and surgery. Her right breast, with an 8-centimeter-long tumor, was removed.
I'll be blue. Can I be blue?
It's an experience that Schultz shares with thousands of other women, including 48-year-old Demetra Turnbull. In 2015, she learned she had breast cancer.
I knew there was something significantly wrong. And I actually told my husband to be prepared, that I didn't think I'd live until I was 50.
Your job is to fix people.
It's the kinds of stories both women are willing to share with these medical undergrads currently on a surgical rotation at St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto.
And you're going to be telling them you're going to cut them open, you're going to cut something out, you're going to fix something in them, you might remove something. And that's a scary, scary thing for a patient to hear.
The medical students are part of a unique pilot project at the Toronto Hospital.
Be very careful with the words that you choose. And even if you've had a really rotten day, or maybe if you had the best day, you can't take it in when you're talking to patients.
Don't be too clinical, too cold, because that doesn't help the patient either, because it makes you either think something's worse, or you're just a number to OHIP.
Okay, knife, please.
The surgeon behind the mask, Dr. Jory Simpson, created the program, a first of its kind in Canada.
We should be able to get both the tumor and the node.
He says he can teach his students how to become skilled surgeons, but he wants them to think beyond the operating room to what happens after the patient is stitched up and recovering. Simpson's aim? To change some long-held myths that his own students have about surgeons.
They often view surgeons as just being the technician in the process. So if somebody presents with, a breast cancer, that the surgeon just removes the tumor and then rids their hands of the patient. But that couldn't be farther from the truth.
You're a part of the team.
That's where Schultz and Turnbull take over. They are Simpson's former patients and now his recruits.
Ask those questions when you're talking to your patients. Do you have somebody at home who can help you? Hopefully, you can take a little bit with you and then give you some food for thought as you engage with your future patients.
Simpson hopes to replicate this program to other hospitals across Toronto and maybe even beyond. As for Turnbull and Schultz, they want their stories to resonate with these future doctors. It already has.
And I think just hearing these patients' stories and really just having a chance to talk to them and ask them questions and get them to teach us sort of, why we decided to go into this.
Any chance where you have, an hour to sit down with someone who's gone through an experience with a disease like cancer is always going to be beneficial, and you can't get that sometimes when you're doing your placements and your rotations.
But you can get it in the stories of survivors. Cass Rusi, CBC News, Toronto.
The Partnership Against Cancer just published a large study looking at the experiences of current and former cancer patients right across the country. Among the findings, 1 in 4 patients said they weren't satisfied with the emotional support they received during outpatient cancer care, and between 12 and 20% of patients said no one discussed different treatment options with them. Well, still ahead on The National, even if you despise people who are late, you might feel bad for a British lord who decided he should pay the ultimate price for his tardiness. That, frankly, bizarre moment is just ahead. But first,
I was quite shocked today to hear how quick everything turned around and how they've now decided to put a complete stop to it. I know there is a lot of people that are getting petitions and trying to get petitions signed to keep the grid girls.
So here's the story. Formula One racing is putting an end to a decades-old tradition. When the new season opens in Australia on March 25th, you will no longer find those so-called grid girls on display. Today, a spokesman said, "We feel this custom does not resonate with our brand values and clearly is at odds with modern-day societal norms. And it does seem to be a sign of the changing times." Racing, of course, has always been the main attraction, but for years, Formula One has also featured attractive young women, sometimes with very specific qualifications, between 5'8" and 5'11", knowing how to walk a catwalk, size 4, dark hair, no tattoos, having a classy, elegant demeanor. It also apparently helps if you like champagne and not for drinking.
I think that now, is the right time to make a change. I think objectifying women in a role where it's seen that men are there risking their lives and being the daredevils and driving the cars, but the girls are only seen next to the cars. They're not allowed to speak. They're not spokespeople for Formula One. They are literally just mute, beautiful girls.
So here's what changed. Last year, the U.S. giant Liberty Media acquired Formula One's commercial rights and aimed to make it more family-friendly. And just days ago, Britain's Professional Darts Corporation scrapped its 20-year tradition of using what they call walk-on girls at televised tournaments, apparently under pressure from broadcasters. Now, there's been some question as to whether the models themselves are the ones losing out here. They're losing their jobs, after all. This is a former grid girl in London.
Having a grid girl at the Formula One creates a great atmosphere for, customers, people fans that are going, that have paid for the tickets, that, families or fathers that take their sons. I think it's a great ego boost for the drivers. I think it creates like a testosterone before the race.
There is a petition to bring grid girls back while pressure builds on other sports to stop using women as decorations.
On The National tonight, Ontario's Progressive Conservative Party says it will announce a new leader on March 10th. The party's former leader, Patrick Brown, resigning a week ago after allegations of sexual misconduct. Voting to replace Brown will be held between March 2nd and 8th, just 3 months before the provincial election. The parents of the man charged with killing 6 people in a Quebec City mosque last year are speaking publicly for the first time. In a letter sent to Radio-Canada and translated from French, the parents of Alexandre Bissonnette say they've been living a nightmare. The heartache and pain caused to the innocent victims and their families by this inexcusable act remains to this day to us completely unexplainable. For us too, sorrow and pain have set in. Alexandre is still our son, whom we love and who will always be part of our family. In a way, we also lost a son. After months of debate, the Senate has passed a bill to make the lyrics of the national anthem gender neutral.
This may be small in the series of things, that it is about 2 words, but it's huge in terms of one of our major national symbols, the anthem that we sing with pride about our country, and we can now sing it with pride knowing that the rules support us.
If you're not going to allow free debate in this chamber, the upper chamber of Canada, then democracy dies an unsavory death, unfortunately.
Conservative senators were outraged. They boycotted the vote, accusing Liberal and Independent senators of muzzling debate. Once the law receives royal assent, the words to the anthem will officially be changed from "In all thy sons command" to "In all of us command."
Okay, we've got one more thing for you here. If you've ever arrived late to work, usually a simple apology is enough, right? But one British lord decided it was too late just to say sorry. So instead, Lord Bates chose to announce his resignation. And his tardiness is our moment of the day.
My Lords, with the leave of the House, I wonder if you permit me to offer my sincere apologies to Baroness Lister for my discourtesy in not being in my place. During the 5 years of which it's been my privilege to answer questions from this dispatcher box on behalf of the government, I've always believed that we should offer rise to the highest possible standards of courtesy and respect in responding on behalf of the government to the legitimate questions of the legislature. I'm thoroughly ashamed at not being in my place, and therefore I shall be offering my resignation to the Prime Minister with immediate effect. I do apologise.
So, Ian, I will fully admit, I don't really understand exactly what just happened there, why he felt the need to do that, whether he had other reasons for stepping down or whether he's just that kind of guy. It's all very confusing.
How about overkill? I mean, if that is his response to being a little bit late, what is his response if he, let your imagination go, like something that was more serious? I am tempted, though, Andrew, to out some of our colleagues who are always late for the noon editorial meeting, but I will not do that right now.
Ask for their resignations, right? All right, thanks, folks, for joining us here on The National for January 31st. Have a good night.
Good night.